Hey, it's Jeremy, Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these live streams, like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, you become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. They'll forward you to my Amazon author page, and you can pick up my books there. All right. So we are getting back to some character designs for my next comic, and I have not touched these in a good hot minute. So this really is me sort of getting, slowly easing my way back into this process, figuring out the looks for each of these characters. And I was sort of a little bit all over the place, still sort of am, in the sense that I had played with the idea of using a group shot of characters as a means of organizing them. I started roughing out sort of a group / team photo or team image. And I just hadn't come back to it. And I will tell you, I was really kind of conflicted because I was trying to decide, do I want to dive into this? Because I feel like I want to work on thumbnails and layouts for the story, but it doesn't make any sense to work on thumbnails or layouts if I don't have my characters completely worked out or designed yet. And this is the problem with starting on a project and then stopping, having to take several weeks off and then returning, is it almost feels like starting from scratch. I'm just going through and I'm looking at some of the previous layers, some of the ideas I had for these different monsters. Basically, it's going to be a series of monsters that the main character is going to be fighting throughout the series. And I'm just sort of looking at what I did here before, trying to see what images kind of speak to me. These are all just kind of loose thumbnail creature designs. Let's see here. Well, I think what might be useful for me is to go back to the original list I had of creatures and maybe leave that at the top. So let me just take this little snippet here. And I'm going to move that to this upper left corner here, and that's just going to be there. So always have sort of a reminder of where I'm working from. Oh, let's move this back up to the top. Maybe this would be better to have it running along horizontally, have this list running along horizontally, so it won't necessarily be in the way while I'm working on these things. Let's see here. Okay. And my intent here isn't that I really am just going to toss everything away and start from scratch. But being how long it has been since I've worked on this, it almost feels like I need to just kind of warm up to the process again, warm up to the characters again, trying to get back to a sense of what I want to feel for each of these. Let's see here. You know what? And honestly, I think maybe some people find the blank page intimidating. I actually kind of like the idea of just having this empty space and seeing what comes out. Mainly because I want to start with sort of I guess, trying to figure out an equivalency for these characters. Who are they? What are they? Where do they fit in? To be honest, the only creature that really feels like it works for me is there's a giant sea monster at the end of this series, and that one feels like it has been worked out relatively well. Like I'm pretty happy with that character design. The other ones, not so much. So let's see here. So really, I just want to start with figuring out what is a normal sized human, because a lot of these monsters are going to be of varying sizes. I don't even know if I'm going to turn this little stick figure into one of the characters, but I want sort of a starting point for comparison. And I'm doing this one, even though The first one is a front view. I'm doing this as a profile. Because I don't feel like I would really get a sense of the creature in a straight-on front view, or at least not the most important parts. It's a little too big. I was thinking of a rat that's maybe the size of a horse. So I may have made it about, a little too big. Yeah, maybe I want a little bigger than a horse. Let's see here. See Paul in the chat. It says, taking a break from mowing the lawn. Good looking creatures. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Hope you're not working too hard out there. It's good that you're taking a break. Hope it's not too warm weather-wise where you're at. Yeah, I haven't touched these creatures in a while, and I got nobody to blame but myself. Just caught up in work stuff and not having the time that I would like to put towards these creature designs for my next book. But yeah, I'm just trying to get sort of a look and a feel, like an overall shape for the creature that's readable and that kind of expresses what I want to express. And to be honest, I feel like I am doing myself a disservice by not having some reference for this creature here, because it's supposed to be sort of a rat monster. Let's see here. Paul says, I would love to have some big creatures in my next story. It looks like fun drawing them. Well, I mean, you have detective crime fiction. I'm not sure how some giant monsters would fit in. It'd be cool to have it happen. I mean, it could just be something as simple as a nightmare that somebody has, but I don't know. You're a creative man. I'm sure you could find a way to make it work. You can work some creatures in there somehow. Let's see here. James is here. He says, hope you're well. I am. Good to see you. Thank you. He says, looks like more insect stuff. Well, I have the insect reference up there, but I should really have rat reference right now, or mouse reference, because that's actually what I'm drawing. I just have the previous screen of reference that I was using before up here. Let's see here. I want to just move this over so I have enough room to really work on the head without it being directly. Don't want that head to be right up on the other character. And I'm already feeling like that snout is not long enough. Like I almost want to give it a really, really long snout. Because mice can do this thing where they can take their nose, there's muscles in their nose, so it pokes out so far that their nose can almost like turn around corners like a periscope. Let's see here. James says, I'm thinking of a rat story from that horror anthology, Nightmares. It's like you might need that kind of reference, but rats and horror go together. Yeah. Yeah, I remember the Stephen King anthology Night Shift. That one had a really dark rat story, which they did turn Night Shift into a movie, but instead of the Stephen King book Night Shift is a collection of horror stories by Stephen King. But they took one particular story that was called The Night Shift about like a factory that was that had these giant rats in it, and they made an entire film about that one story, which to me it was an entertaining story, but of all the stories in that book, that's not what I would have picked. Wait, no, you know what? The book wasn't called Night Shift. The book was called Skeleton Crew, I think, but they picked a story from it called Night Shift. My memory is a little loopy because it has literally been decades since I've read that book. But as far as Stephen King books go, that particular horror anthology was one of my favorites. I've had the audio book for Full Stars, Full Dark, No Stars for a very long time. I just have not made time to read it. So, longtime Stephen King fan. I just haven't kept up with any of his work in a while. Just trying to spend more time reading as widely as possible, and it means moving away from some of my old time go tos. Actually, I want to read some of there's a few of Joe Hill's books that I haven't read yet that I want to read. I've had Horns for a long time, haven't read that. I read Heart Shaped Box and Nosferatu, the one that they made that AMC show from. Did not see the show, but the book was great. And I know that Joe Hill did that great comic series. Yeah, Lock and Key. And I read the first volume of it and I really enjoyed it, but I do that a lot where I'll read the first volume of a series and just thinking, oh, well, if I like it, I'll eventually come back to it. And then I have all these books that I've read the first volume of and then never finish. But no, I think if anything, I'm probably more interested in reading Joe Hill's work these days than Stephen King's, not out of any dislike, but because it's interesting with Stephen King being his dad, you can feel some of that horror DNA, but at the same time, he has his own voice. And I think it's just interesting to read that difference, not necessarily in terms of trying to intentionally contrast father and son, but just, he's been around for long enough that he's not a new voice in horror anymore, but he's newer to me than somebody who grew up reading Stephen King's work. So I think it's not really a one or the other. It's just, what am I in the mood for? So what I did here is I kind of, and I'm probably, it's always a weird thing when I'm doing thumbnails because I want to draw these things really tiny so I don't bog myself down with details. But then you guys can't really tell what the hell I'm doing. But I intentionally made the face longer and then kind of made the mouth, the muzzle part, intentionally longer, but almost feeling like it's detached. Like I intentionally am putting sort of a break here between the mass of the skull and where the muzzle really projects out to kind of give a sense of this form that is breaking out and almost like a prehensile face, if that makes any sense. Let's see here. Oh yeah, James corrected me. He said Graveyard Shift. I was thinking Night Shift was the name of the book, but it's Graveyard Shift. Yeah, that Stephen King book was one of my favorites, and I read it multiple times as a teenager, and then I just never came back to it. But I think I'm due for a reread. But Stephen King has so many books that I haven't read. Like I've never read The Green Mile. I went through a period when I was probably from about 14 through my early 20s, I was very, very heavy into Stephen King. And at that point, I think he'd probably had maybe like 40 books, and I had read half of them. So that's 20 books from one author. That's a lot. I think I had read all the short story collections he had done by then. I'd read It, The Stand. That one where he's got the alternate personality that was his fictional his pen name that he tried to kill off and then it came back from the dead. Pet Sematary, of course. I mean, obviously he'd written a ton of books then, but me thinking, oh, if I keep going, I might actually read everything he's ever published. But Stephen King can write faster than I can read. So no, now at this point I'm like, nah, I mean, I didn't even finish the Gunslinger, the Dark Tower series until maybe like, I want to say 5 or 7 years ago. And only that was because somebody gave me an audiobook collection so I could sit and listen to it while I draw. Let's see here. And Paul says, watched The Wall last night, 2017 movie with Matt Damon about the Great Wall of China. It had giant rat creatures, pretty fun movie. Oh, that's interesting. You know what? I think I saw that on, I saw it either on, not watched it, but I saw it come up as available either on Netflix or Hulu, one of the two. And I like Matt Damon. I like, mythological fantasy type stories, which is what it seemed like it was. And on that recommendation, I think I'll put it on my list. I'll see if I can talk my wife into watching it. Let's see here. James says, I know you can use visuals to tell a story, but can you blend genres in a visual sense? I'm trying to think of ways to express ideas visually. That movie, The Cell, relies heavily on visuals, whereas Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter, blends genres due to the events that happen in the story. You have your swashbuckling action, but you also have your horror elements. See here. And Paul says, damn, that's crazy. He can write fast and you can read. Dude is prolific. I mean, you know what? I mean, when you're in that space that you're doing the thing that you feel like you are called to do, I mean, that I've been thinking about that a lot lately, in that most of my time is spent doing things that are not what I consider my purpose in the universe. And I think about how, for me, like, for instance, my wife and I started watching that that How to Be Rich series on Netflix by Ramit Sethi. And one of the things he talks about is, what is your dream life? What is your dream rich life? And for me, my dream rich life is being in a place where I can spend my time fulfilling what I think is my purpose. And for me, my purpose is to tell stories visually with comics and illustration. When I say that's my purpose, I don't say that's the thing that makes me the most money, because to be honest, it's very hard to make a living doing this. And it's not, my design work tends to be my product design, my toy design work tends to be what pays the bills. But it is the act that, regardless of financial compensation, visual storytelling is the thing where I feel like at peace with the universe. It's where I feel like I am living the experience I was put in this universe for. All of that to say that Stephen King, I think, is in a space where he is able to live his purpose. And I think that's a big part of his prolification. I don't know. Prolificness. Yeah, me, the writer. But whatever it is, whatever the proper wording is, I think that having the space to do that is one of the things that really helps with being prolific. Or who knows, maybe he was prolific first and that led to the other. I'm not sure. So let's go back to what James was saying about blending genres in a visual sense. Well, that's absolutely something. I mean, that's really easy. You can take almost anything. In fact, I'm going to start sketching the example you said there with horror with swashbuckling elements. First off, you can say all of the, what is that movie? All the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. It's playful horror, like kind of the Haunted Mansion type horror, as opposed to really scary horror. But all of the pirates on the Black Pearl are ghosts. They're monsters. So visually, all of the concept design for that blends horror with pirates. But I think you could take almost anything. Like, now, how well it's blended is a whole nother idea. But let's take something like, say, romance and let's say romance and dinosaurs. Caveman romance. Two things you would not think go together. Now, I'm going to switch to a low opacity brush because I'm going to have to really scribble here. But you could have something like I'm just trying to block in two faces kind of looking at each other in sort of a romantic embrace. And it's hard for me to, as I'm doing this, to not think of the Flintstones. Let's see. She's got her arm up around his shoulder. Let's put her hand up here. And with his back muscles. Let's say she's got like a fur cloak around her. And I've actually never read Clan of the Cave Bear, but that right there is something that, from what I understand, it is sort of like survival in prehistoric or early man times, talking about, just people trying to survive in early, like, pre-farming culture type things. But in telling the story of like how these clans, the relationships between them, who ends up partnering with who's the leader of the clan, that my outward understanding, never having read any of the books, is that there are some romantic elements to it. But point of what I'm imagining here is big square-jawed caveman. You know, let's just leave him bald. There's no reason for me to go too all out with this. Point being is you can have, you know, woman there, super muscular caveman. And maybe he's got a club behind him, or he's holding a club. And in the background, framing them against the let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's say that there's a sunset and there's a dinosaur. My point is only that when it comes to combining elements, you start with the bad version, because this might be the bad version of combining elements that don't go together. But let's say you want to do science fiction and magic. Let's say you want to do romance and dinosaurs. Let's say you want to do detective and I don't know, coming of age story, which really that's what Brick is. Ryan, not Ryan Gosling, the guy who directed Looper. I'm losing the capacity to think while drawing. Directed Looper and directed The Last Jedi. Hang on a sec. Let's see here. Paul says, I'm in a good spot now, making money day by day, making money by day, comics at night. I used to be frustrated by my day job. I don't think I could do comics full time. It's too hard. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm going through some work shifts right now, and I'm working freelance now as opposed to being full time. But the comics are not the place where the money's coming from. And here's the thing. I think that I agree that that's okay. The thing that I'm having difficulty with now is I used to have a good balance between my personal time to make art for me and my day job. And now that balance has been kind of thrown off a bit. And my goal is to have a place, enough time set aside that I can make comics because I want to tell visual stories. And if I can find a way to market them and make them profitable, it will allow me to spend more time towards it. But it's the thing that I'm doing because I love doing it. I don't want to put the money before the actual thing that I want to spend time creating. If that makes any sense. Like, I'm okay with it if it's not the thing that's the huge moneymaker, as long as I have time to actually do it because I enjoy doing it. And right now, it doesn't feel like I have anywhere near as much time as I used to, which is weird because I'm not full-time in-house anymore. And just a lot of stuff going on. Let's see here. John Ersick in the chat from last week's episode. He says, I missed. Is this from reference or imagination? So this is from imagination. One of our community members in the chat had asked about blending genres together visually. And just as a example, I said like dinosaur romance or caveman romance. So I'm just putting a dinosaur, a romantic couple, and my point in doing this quick sketch, because I'm not going to refine it too much, I'm just going to finish off the visual elements there, is that almost anything you want to do or any genres you want to combine, you just put the elements in the picture And then from there, the elements itself are, and James, if you could give me an actual exact example of what you're thinking of two elements you want to combine, I'd show you how I would approach that. But the way, as a top level, the way I would approach it is I would just put visual representations of those genres in one image composition, and then I would do a bunch of thumbnails to say, all right, how do I go from just matching these two things together to an actual compelling image that tells a story and feels unified? So it starts with doing the bad version and then refining it with multiple thumbnails, if that makes sense. Let's see here. Oh yeah, Ryan Johnson, that's the director. This is the director I was trying to think of. And see here. And Paul mentions detective giant rat creatures. Oh, okay. I could probably sketch that one out. Give me a sec. Let's see here. And John says it's looking great. Feels like a sketch from reference. Well, that's good news to me. It means I'm doing something right here. If I'm able to draw something from my head that feels somewhat referenced, then it means I've absorbed enough drawn from reference that I've got that mental library. Not a Kim Jong-un mental library, but I've got a mental library. Let's see here. And James says sci-fi with crime elements. Yes. So let me just, there's not a ton to really finish off with this, but really, if I were going to do something like this, like I wanted to do a caveman romance, I would work on the actual pose and really try to make this feel as romantic as possible, whereas this is just a rough pose. I try to have something where the club is more in the club that he's holding would be more like maybe over his shoulder while he's kissing her or about to kiss her. So it feels like he's got a weapon, and that weapon is a symbol of the genre. But at the same time, he's not like he's going to, you're not thinking he's going to beat her. So it's just a matter of posing it so that he's got the trappings of the genre, while at the same time, he's in a pose that is representative of the other genre that we're taking into consideration, being romance. So sci-fi with crime elements. Well, what's interesting is when you mention that, I've watched so many movies over the course of my life that, let's see here, that when I hear anything, any particular genre, and I'm thinking about examples of it, I can think of movies or books that already have those genres. So, for instance, hang on, I gotta blow my nose real quick. Allergy season back. Let me mute for a second. All right, unmuted. So when I think of combining something like crime and science fiction, the first thing that I think of is like film noir crime. So I think of combining something like Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. I mean, that's one of the classics of like, you know, detective fiction mixed with science fiction. I also would think of something like wow, I've really lost the ability to recall things. There was a series on Netflix, and is where people could wear different bodies like a suit. Altered Carbon, that's what it is. Altered Carbon, that's also science fiction. You know, science fiction, but it's a detective story that's sci-fi. Let's see here. And John in the chat says sci-fi with crime elephant. Yeah, the elements. He said exactly what I was saying. Blade Runner. He said spruce up with organized crime elephant, sci-fi mafia. Guess that's Cyberpunk 2077. And he says, I guess the sprucing it up is more a matter of execution than genre choice. They'll end up being fun. Yeah, see, that's the thing. There's a lot of stuff where there's a lot of really good examples already. We could follow down that Altered Carbon, Cyberpunk 2077, Blade Runner type stories. Let's see here. Paul's in the chat and he says, my first book is detective procedural with vampires. See, there we go. Crime and supernatural, horror elements. Let's see here. Martin's in the chat. It says, hey, let's get these likes up. You know what? I keep forgetting to tell people right early on, hit that like button. Hit that share button, spread the word. Let's throw those out now while we're actually streaming. And I appreciate the reminder, Martin. Thank you. Yeah, and James says, yes, Altered Carbon, which, by the way, I have not watched Altered Carbon and I have not read the books based on Altered Carbon, but it is something that I want to check out because it looks like it's my jam. I just haven't made any time for it. Oh, Paul gives it a ringing endorsement. He says Altered Carbon was great. Did you see the animated movie? And so sadly, no, I haven't seen any of them. And James says Facebook doesn't like me spamming me with the like button. Well, I mean, I get that if they don't want you sharing stuff, it seems weird that they wouldn't want you to hit the like button on something you're watching and liking. But I don't know, Facebook. I don't know. All these social media is out of pocket. I don't know. Social media ain't right lately. I mean, for me, if I were thinking, and another science fiction crime story, very differently told, Looper. Looper is a science fiction crime story right there. I'm thinking more in terms of let's lean into the organized crime thing or a science fiction hitman. I don't know. Science fiction hitman. That could be something as simple as, like, let's say you were making a movie poster about, I don't know, not Donnie Brasco, but I'm trying to think, what is the name of that Whitey Bulger, that famous enforcer? Okay, well, here's an interesting thing. And this is see, that's the thing. Every time I think of something, I think of really good examples that exist. So let's say that instead of a science fiction story that is someone out there in the world committing crimes, let's say it's a science fiction prison story. So you've got someone and I was going to say, let's say you've got a cyborg and normally he would have these super big, bulky arms, but because he's in a prison and they don't want him to hurt other people or be a danger to the guards, they've taken his like really powerful cybernetics and now he just has like these really scrawny robot arms. And maybe it's still got large robotic mitts, like the actual palms, but it's like the hands themselves might be big, but these arms, these robot arms are so spindly, they're barely big enough to move those big arms around. Like you've got a guy with a huge build and tiny little skinny robot arms, so he doesn't hurt anybody. And maybe he's got like, I don't know, one cybernetic eye. And the reason why I tend to trail off in multiple directions as I'm talking is because as soon as I said science fiction and prison, first thing I thought of was Andor. because I don't know how many of you have seen the Disney Star Wars series Andor, but a big chunk of the third act takes place in a prison, and you get to see what Imperial prisons are like in the Star Wars universe. So that's a place. And I mean, and there are other science fiction movies. I'm sure if we just said, all right, science fiction prisons, there are other stories about prisons in space colony prisons. I'm trying to remember if that movie Outlander was a prison movie or if it was just about a moon colony. And when I say Outlander, I don't mean the romantic time travel story. There was an old movie that I want to say was either like Tom Skerritt or Tom Selleck, one of those 70s mustached guys. I can't remember who. No, it was Sean Connery, I think, was in Outlander. Which is weird because he's also in Highlander. But there is, or it might just have been called Outland as opposed to Outlander. But there was an old, like either 70s or 80s science fiction movie. And I want to say it was about a prison on the moon. And I have not read the comic book Bitch Planet by Kelly Sue DeConnick, but that's another science fiction. Well, it's a science fiction prison story, but prison stories are invariably crime stories. But anyway, my point was I was going to draw all this and then just say, all right, you've got, well, hell, let's just switch to white. You've got these laser bars going up in front of the main character. So if I were to do this as a digital painting, I'd do it where it's all dark and it's being kind of lit by the bars. My point is that visually you can combine any genre. It's a matter of what is the type of story you want to tell. And if you don't know, a lot of times sketching out the idea will help you figure out the direction you want to go with it. Let's say I was actually going to do this as a story, and I decided the story is about, I don't know, a prison break in space. Which again, that not to really spoil Andor, but that's kind of the thrust of the third act of this story. But some sort of crime story set in space that involves a prison. Then I might look at a lot of movies about prison and then try and find one that maybe feels very different from science fiction, and then add science fiction elements to that. Okay, The Green Mile set in space. How's that? How does that sound? The Green Mile, same concept, but just set in space where, somehow somebody's able to connect. Maybe instead of being able to breathe life into a thing, maybe the guy somehow is able to connect to Wi-Fi networks or nanotechnology, or like an AI that kind of connects everyone, and he's able to attach, connect to it, even though in theory he should be shut off from everything because they're in a prison and it's got Wi-Fi blocking. Yeah, something like that. So I don't know, James, does that make sense in terms of any of the stuff that that I was throwing out there? Martin in the chat says, Altered Carbon, I assure you, it's your jam. All right. With multiple votes of confidence, I definitely need to check that out. I know, especially, having Anthony Mackie in the, I don't know if he was the second or third season. I know that he comes in and he plays, because I know that the whole point is that he's a character who fits into different bodies. He takes different sleeves in different, time periods in the future. And that he's basically just in the body of Anthony Mackie in the whatever was the last season. So I definitely want to check that out. And Paul also endorses Andor as well. Now, I will tell you, I heard a lot of complaints from people that Andor was slow and boring. Andor is slow. It's slow, but it's thoughtfully slow. It's not a breakneck pace action story, because it's more of political intrigue. And I mean, it's sort of like he's doing a story about how does a corrupt organization like the Empire run? How does it operate? And they're showing you different aspects of it in terms of like the planets that they're ruling, the prisons that they set up. There's a great setup in the end where you see what the prisoners or the forced labor of the prisoners is being used towards. Not very hard to guess, but anyway, let's see here. James also mentions Sean Connery, right? He says Fortress is another example of science fiction that takes place in a prison. Yeah, so I mean, you see what I'm saying here. This whole idea of mashing up genres visually, there are no rules about it. And if you look at Fortress versus Altered Carbon versus Blade Runner versus Andor, like those are just off the top of the head with us talking here, that that there's so many different examples of how you combine those two, science fiction and crime dramas, that you can sit there and literally take anything you want and put it together. And it's more about finding something that fits what you're trying to say than it is about there being rules on how to combine them. A lot of times for creativity is mostly about just putting pieces together and seeing what happens. Let's see here. And Martin says Outlander is also a classic. Yeah, I kind of need, there's a lot of really cool, like late 70s, early 80s science fiction stories that are just weird and crazy and dark and edgy. And yeah, I need to go back and revisit. I mean, there's a reason, honestly, the fact that people are like, why are they remaking this movie or that movie? There's a lot of stuff that it's worth seeing what it would be like if it was remade now. So, and James says, yeah, I think so, in terms of like the ideas of combining stuff. Well, I hope that was somewhat helpful. I mean, I've had ideas for doing science fiction, a prison story, and it's one of those where I just wrote down the basic idea and never got around. I have like a whole like Word doc of just writing ideas. I just come up with, put them in a folder, come back to them when I can. More ideas than I have time to tell them. All right. So back to this creature. Now, the idea is that this creature represents disease. So I'm just putting all of these sores. And tumors on it. And to be honest, this isn't something that I want to look up research for, because unfortunately I've seen rats, pet rats. They frequently do get tumors, and it's really sad and it's really unpleasant. And I mean, looking at the reference for something like that is something where it's both heartbreaking and super gross. So I'm not going to look it up here online with you guys, but it may be something that I might have to look up in order to make this story or this creature look the way I want it to look. I feel like there should be some sort of spittle or slime or, pus kind of running down its body. I'm going to come in here and erase a little bit out of the nose because that is something that I think can really sell the idea of disease, is trying to actively have mucus kind of coating the front of the muzzle and kind of running down the mouth. And also, it's that challenge of, well, how detailed do I want this creature to be? Because if I'm drawing this in a comic, am I going to want to be drawing all of this all the time? And the answer is no. But see, that goes back to that whole idea, which I'm sure you guys have heard before, about designing creatures with strong silhouettes. Is that I can definitely have a sequence where I've got this creature. You know what? Let me just throw a layer on top of this. And let's say that this creature is sort of walking through shadow and you don't even see its face, but maybe you see like the head is in shadow. Part of the torso and the back is in shadow, but you get like a little shaft of light. There's a little bit of light at the tail. So imagine, if you will, surrounded by dark gray. You know what? This will work better if, instead of being real precious about it, I just put a layer underneath and then just paint the gray behind it. That way I can come out here and just erase out whatever I need light for. So you've got it lurking through some dark shadows somewhere. And then amidst that dark shadow, you've got let's go a little bit lighter than that. Not full white, but bright. You know, that's a way in which, let's say you're drawing a creature and it's super detailed. A creature, a character, anyone who maybe has a very detailed costume, and you don't want to draw that detail in every single shot. then maybe it's something where you just have little flecks of light hitting it. And the rest can all be in silhouette. Let's see here. Let's see. Omar's in the chat. Hey, Jeremy. Hey, good to see you, Omar. Thanks for dropping in. By the way, something else I forgot to mention at the top of the show. So not next week, tomorrow will be the first Monday of the month. And we will be doing art book study group for Patreon subscribers. So that's where we do deep dives to some of the best art books around, try to suck out all the knowledge we can. And we do a session. We've been doing a long-running study of the book The Figure by Walt Reed. And we just go through page by page, do studies. We have the voice channel open on Discord while we're doing it. So as opposed to just typing in the chat, we can get on and have conversations. You can send stuff for me to look at of your own work, to do drawovers on during the live stream. That's for Patreon subscribers. If you head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy, you can sign up for that. So anyway, we'll be doing a session tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Let's see here. All right. So I've got one creature sort of designed out here. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them to actually properly design. So we will, I'm slowly getting back into this because I'm still getting back into the story development per se. Like, I mean, I've rewritten this thing so many times, and now it's almost like I'm trying to do like kind of a fresh draft with kind of a little bit more perspective on trying to simplify it and cut it down to its most basic elements, because I overcomplicate things. I very much do. I'm completely guilty of that. And so now I need to force myself to simplify things. And that's not easy, but I've tried to take my writing process and make it now where I can kind of, in a simpler way, do like a large pass over the whole, like to do drafts of the outline and the story development in the same way that a screenwriter would do a full script, then analyze it, and then do a whole, like doing drafts of a script. I'm trying to create a comic process for me to do multiple drafts of a comic book to kind of refine it from fixing the big major structural problems down to the minor detail problems. And then hopefully, I can get started on drawing this comic. You guys can actually see the comic and I can start posting it. All right. On that note, let's come back to the big screen here. All right. So, as I mentioned, we do art book study group twice a month. We'll be having a session tomorrow night, 7:30 Pacific Standard Time. If you'd like to join, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. We also have a Discord server that's a Patreon exclusive server where we share works in progress, art exercises, talk about creative process and art tools, and you also get access to a online archive. You can read my comic books digitally. So head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy, check that out. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical copies of my comic books or free digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a standalone psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. Or my most recent comic book series, Morningstar. It is a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains the conclusion to the series, issues 5 through 8. Both have extensive back matter, character designs, script excerpts, page layouts, photo reference. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you want to see what's inside these books before you purchase them, go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, scroll down to book flip throughs, and there are flip through videos of all 3 of those books. You can see what's inside them before picking them up. All right. So guys, again, thank you for hanging out. Always good to see you, to hang out, spend time. And wow, that's weird. Yeah, James says, I guess it's over now. My internet just cut out. That's odd. I don't know if that's happening on your end or on my end, because on mine it says the stream is still going. So I don't know what's going on your end. Sorry to hear that. James says, read the books. Thank you, James. I appreciate the endorsement. All right, everybody. That's it for now. Go be creative.